So, we went through water and what water does, okay? We went through atoms and how they work. Now, let's talk about carbon. Because carbon, what do you know about carbon? Carbon is atomic number 12. No, I lied. It is atomic number 6. Which means what about carbon? What's that? 6 protons. Okay, good. What else? It's not a metal. What about its electrons? It had 6 electrons. How many on the outer shell? 4. Therefore, how many bonds can carbon make? 4. Okay? This is essential. The structure of carbon, okay, and the fact that it can make those 4 bonds, its structure leads to its versatility. Okay? We're going to talk about organic compounds now. Those that include or have carbon inside them, or are composed of carbon. We're going to talk about lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Those are the 4 macromolecules that we're involved in. All right? But carbon is make up the backbone of all of those. Okay? So, organic compounds are those that are composed of or have carbon. Okay? But carbon structure, the fact that it has those 4 electrons in its outer shell and can make 4 bonds, all right, allows it its versatility to form large, complex, diverse molecules. Okay? We've already said inorganic versus organic molecules. Organic molecule is something that contains carbon. All right? Something that does not contain carbon is what? Inorganic. So, important molecules that we're going to be talking about. Carbohydrates, right? Lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. All right? Each of these molecules will be composed, all right, of smaller subunits. All right? We're going to talk about the subunits or what we call monomers. All right? And the fact that we're going to link those monomers or subunits together to form larger molecules. Okay? In the case of carbohydrates, it's going to be a monosaccharide, right? Or simple sugar. So a monosaccharide. I think I spelled that right. I think there's an H in there somewhere. Okay? Lipids are going to be composed of a glycerol molecule plus fatty acids. Okay? Proteins are going to be composed of amino acids. And nucleic acids are composed of nucleotides. Okay, those are the subunits. We're going to talk about each of them. We'll get into the subunits later on. I'm just giving you the overview right now. Okay? Those are what we call macromolecules, big molecules, and they can be very big, right? They could be tens, dozens, hundreds of carbon molecules long, okay? And then nitrogen, hydrogen, whatever. Yes?
What is the word next to carbohydrates?
Monosaccharides. Don't worry about it right now. You'll see it in a second. I was just writing it down for me, and it's up there, okay? So with that one. So let's look at the structure of carbon. Okay? We know it has 4 electrons in its outer shell. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And carbon, because it's in the middle, still doesn't like to give up its electrons. So what type of bond was carbon most likely going to form? A covalent bond. Okay? And it can form up to 4 bonds to reach a stable state. Okay? So the simplest organic molecule right, would be just hydrogens. Right, and what you see from now on, those lines will be covalent bonds. So this right here, one of the simplest organic molecules, CH4, is methane gas. Okay? So carbon, central carbon, 4 covalently bonded hydrogens. So we talked about valence shell, the ability, the fact that there are four valence electrons that enjoy sharing electrons, right? Again, ability to make large complex molecules. Now, if we have molecules with multiple carbons, right? Each carbon is bonded to 4 other atoms, has what we call a tetrahedral shape. Okay? So when I have your methane, here's your central carbon, what's really going to happen is this is going to look like this. In 3 dimensions, that's what it looks like. This little triangle meaning it's coming out at you. And these two are kind of, think about kind of a tripod and then one on top. Why is it this tetrahedral shape and not the way it's it's different than the way I drew it before. You know, I draw it like this.
Because they're three-dimensional.
They're three-dimensional and hydrogens take up space. Okay? You have to assume that all of these elements, all right, the atoms, they have to have their own space. Okay? So that's not two-dimensional, they're three-dimensional, and they're going to need their own living space. Okay? So with the four molecules bound to carbon, they occupy their own space. Carbon has its own space, so it forces it in this tetrahedral shape, which kind of looks like a pyramid. Okay? But when you have the 2 carbon atoms joined by a double bond, things change. Okay? When you start to add carbons together, right? Carbon to carbon, now the hydrogens get pushed a different way from each other. Right? That changes the shape. What is the importance of changing the shape of a molecule? Shape dictates function. So if I change the shape, I'm going to alter the function. Okay? One of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was studying chemistry and moving into organic chemistry, understand that all the atoms need their space, right? And it's like a puzzle. Nature will find a way to fit things in a stable state so that everything has its own space. Okay? So the natural structure of ethene, which is what you see right here, is a little different because everything has its own space. And it will change and bend accordingly. Okay? But when you have your 4 single covalent bonds, right, you have that tetrahedral shape. When the 2, just a second. So it looks like something like this. There's your methane, structural formula. Here is your tetrahedral shape. Okay? Now, ethane on a single bond, what do you see here? We've just flipped this, and everything still, this carbon and that carbon still maintain their tetrahedral shape. Yes? Now, things change when I have this double bond. Now everything is put on one plane. Again, this is just showing the stability of the carbons so that everything is on a stable state in a stable area. Everything has its own space. Okay? Questions? Are you going to have to know this like outright? I'm not going to ask you to draw it and tell you. This is just to understand, really understand the concept of structure and function. Understand the concept that carbon structure leads to its ability to make these other molecules. All right? So we have your covalent compatibility. What does it mean, covalent compatibility? How easily they're shared. And the fact that there's 4 electrons in its outer shell leads to carbon liking to share electrons. It's a willing trade partner. Okay? Most of the time, you see most of the carbon bonds with bonding with nitrogen, hydrogens, oxygens, right? Those are the most willing partners, all right? And they say that this is the building code, okay? Most of the molecules we've talked about up to this point that we talked about that have carbon in them also have hydrogen and oxygen, okay? When we talk about proteins, they have made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, okay? So that's about it. Okay? Here's our valence electrons. Here's nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. What can we do with this? How many bonds between carbon and nitrogen can be made? Okay, so carbon and nitrogen by itself can make 3. Is that happy for carbon? No, it's still not. Why? It needs what? 1 more. All right. So usually, so we talk about carbon and hydrogen, they can make 4. Carbon and oxygen can make 2, right? And then they're both happy, right? 2 oxygens and 2 nitrogen, they can make 2 double bonds and make CO2. But carbon and nitrogen, they kind of need other help, right? They don't equal out easily. All right, so we can Carbon can interact with oxygen, CO2, basically 2 double bonds, form a inorganic carbon, and then urea. So let's draw this one out. How are we going to do that? Here's our carbon, right? It's going to have a bonding to an oxygen. Yes? And then what? Is it 1 bond to oxygen or 2? It's 2 bonds to oxygen, right? And then 1 to NH2 here, and 1 to NH2 there. These are H's. How many bonds does carbon have? 4, making it stable. Okay? All the molecules in this case now are stable. Okay? This is just exemplifying the differences, different bonds that the partners that carbon can make, and it's whether or not it's a double bond versus a single bond. Okay? What you see up there is a structure of estrogen and testosterone. Okay? In each of the vertices of these rings, you can assume that that's a carbon. Okay? This is just to show you, like, this is the structure. Okay? It's not about seeing how it is. When we start talking about structures like this, ring structures, understand that those lines are bonds between carbons. Okay? And if there's not enough, so you see that there's a double bond here, right? There's a double bond right here. There's a single bond there. Where's the other bond? It's a hydrogen that's not written in. Okay? So when we start doing these structures, you understand this stuff. You got a question?
Why does it double bond to oxygen?
So why does carbon double bond to oxygen again? So here's carbon, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Oxygen, how many does oxygen have on its outer shell? In its outer shell. Oxygen's atomic number is 8. So it has how many? 6 in its outer shell. So how many bonds does oxygen need to make? Each of the bonds from oxygen have to make 2. So it pairs up with these two pair up with those two, therefore you have a double bond. Okay? Why do you think in the picture there, these things are shaded in blue? What's the importance of that? Look at the structure of estrogen versus testosterone. Is it so? Pretty close, right? The basic backbone is there. You have 3 6-member rings and a 5-member ring that's attached. Some of the players change a little bit, bonds, but the basic structure's there. Yes? And even some of these guys over here are the same, right? So why are we shading these in blue? What's that important? It makes them different. And you know that there's a difference in function, a vast difference in function between estrogen and testosterone. Yes? Those two or three side groups, right, what we call subgroups, off of carbons, that makes the difference between the two of them. That little bit. Structure and function relationship. Okay? So this OH, when it comes off of carbon, is called an alcohol group. Okay? So ethanol is 2 carbons, right? 2 carbon molecule, but off of one of them is an OH group. Makes it an ethanol. Okay? This double bond over here makes it a ketone. That's a ketone group. Double bond O right there. This right here, that's a methyl group. They're extensions off of the main carbon chain. Okay? They're not part of the main carbon chain, which are these 4 rings. Understood? So those are what we call side groups. Those side groups are important in the structure and the function of the main carbon chain, of the main molecule. Okay? And that arises from your variation, it allows for variation along those carbon skeletons. So if I drew a molecule that had 6 carbons, okay, it's a hexose or a 6-carbon sugar, okay? If I change the way a couple of those side groups, well, now it's glucose, which is a 6-carbon sugar, right, without any side groups, and I add one of the side groups, and now it's a ketone instead. It functions much differently. Cells don't use that for energy other than, okay? So here's your carbon skeleton, what they can look like, what you see right there. Okay, here's a carbon, some hydrogens. Right, this is ethane gas. Now I take one of those hydrogens off and replace it with an OH. That's ethanol. Okay? Here's what it looks like. So there's ethane, propane, right? So we can have 2 carbon molecule, 3 carbon molecule, we could have it in a long chain. In blue up there, it's just recognizing the longest carbon chain. Okay? So the number of carbons changes its name. So instead of from 2 to 3, we go from ethane to propane. Okay? If I continue to put more carbons on, I go from propane to up to 8, it's octane. Difference between propane and octane? What do you put in your car? Octane. What do you put in your gas grills at home? Propane, right? Big difference, right? But they're both gases, they both have function, okay? Now, we could look at double bonds. When you add a double bond to this, it's now butene. Double bond changes its name, changes its function. Branching, right? So we have butane, 4-carbon molecule versus butene. And now this, still 4-carbon molecule, you all right? What's the longest chain though? 3. So it's a methylpropane, not a butane. Still has 4 carbons. Yes? Both of those, butane and methylpropane, have 4 carbons, but one is not part of the main chain. It's branched off. Okay? And then we have some cyclo, they can form rings as well. Great illustration of the diversity of bonds that carbon can make. Okay? So, what do you think is going to happen when we move into macromolecules with carbon? Will the diversity continue to be utilized? Absolutely. Right now, none of these up here are biological molecules that are important for cell life. None of them. Okay? But we can change these and utilize them for things, right? Really what we're going to be talking about is hydrocarbons. Okay? So C6H12O6, okay, contains hydrogen, yes. Contains oxygen, yes. Contains carbon, yes. That is a hydrocarbon. All right? Fats, carbohydrates, all have like these components. Proteins have these components. All right, and we look at hydrocarbons because of their use by cells and by fossil fuels and humanity in general. You break them down and they release energy. Energy that then is stored and transferred in the form of ATP, right, in cells. C6H12O6 is glucose. So what we were discussing when we're talking about those side parts off of the carbon change are what we call functional groups. The functional groups give the carbon molecules their purpose. They change their function. Okay? And the number and arrangement of those groups will alter the shape, thus altering what? Function. Okay? Now, I don't expect you to know all the functional groups. Okay? Or what they are. I expect you, this is to understand what they, when we're talking about them, what terminology-wise, what they are. Okay? So here's hydroxyl, carbonyl, carboxyl, amino. This is important for proteins, the amino one. Right? We're going to talk about phosphate, what a methyl is. Right? And the carboxyl one is also important. Those are the more important ones. Okay? But this is, I will not ask you on the exam to say which of the following is an example of a carboxyl group or something like that. Right? But when you see it, I want you to be able to recognize it. All right? So this is what it looks like. This is in your book. You don't have to write it down. Okay? But look, understand what these are. Okay? So if you went through, okay, here's an OH, a hydroxyl group that makes an alcohol. Okay? A double bond O makes a ketone or an aldehyde, depending upon where it is. Okay? A COOH, that's a carboxyl group, carboxylic acid or an organic acid, important for amino acids. Amino would probably have an amine group, right, on one end, an acid or carboxylic acid group on the other end. All right, there's your amino group, NH2, on top here. All right, and then these other ones are less important. We have phosphate. This is a very important one. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about nucleic acids, right, and phosphates. So the transfer of PO4. Okay, and then methyl groups on top. So don't feel like you exhaustive have to know all of this or draw it out. This is for you to understand and have an idea of what it is terminology-wise when I'm talking about it. Okay? Questions on that? Let's talk about cellular energy. And another important molecule, ATP. Okay? Adenosine triphosphate is an organic phosphate molecule that's composed of a 5-carbon sugar, okay? Adenosine, a base, adenosine, right? And phosphates, times 3. Okay? So this is the important part in terms of energy. This is part of its structure. Adenosine, that's these two, 5-carbon and triphosphate. 3 phosphate molecules linked in succession. All right, so we're gonna, let's move, okay. This is what it looks like. All right, so really, this adenosine right here actually has a 5-carbon sugar attached with it too, but don't worry about it. I'm showing it to you all together. These bonds are important. They are high energy bonds. Okay? Especially the one that goes from the number 2 phosphate to the number 3 phosphate. And when your cells break down ATP, it takes this phosphate off, okay? And when it does, it releases energy. This is a high energy bond, okay? ATP is not necessarily a very stable molecule, right? So it gets utilized, broken down by enzymes in your body to release energy. Okay? This is the equation. Your triphosphate reacts with water, right? And leads to an ADP, adenosine diphosphate, plus energy. This is a reaction called hydrolysis. Did we talk about that? No, not yet. We will. How we build things up and blow them and break them down. How do we build things up? We'll talk about the reactions that we use to build things up, a dehydration synthesis, and how we break them down, hydrolysis reactions. All right? Because what's coming out of here, what are we putting in? What are we putting in? Right here. Water. Water, hydro. Lysis means to break. What are we breaking? What bond? The bond, this bond right here, right? Between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate. So hydrolysis, hydrolysis, water breaking. We're using water to break that bond. Okay? Questions on that? Any questions on carbon up to there? We'll go into more detail with the carbohydrates and dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis over the next, probably on Monday.